I used to reside in the city of Houston. I grew up in the burbs, but moved inner city as soon as I could get away from the strip malls and chain restaurants. I moved to Inner Loop, Houston. The 610 Loop is a freeway that unofficially separates the metro core from the residential, industrial outskirts of the city to a small, historic neighborhood, the Montrose District, that was mostly attractive to college students. Montrose is pretty socially liberal and probably the most out there Houston neighborhood, culturally speaking. Lots of cool antique rental properties and garden apartments for singles and couples in their 20s. But not the kind of area that most people can afford to purchase a house or have the space for a family. I was very young when I first moved to Montrose, so I ate it up. The dive bars, the restaurants, music clubs, coffee shops, street fests, proximity to the museum district. It was great. But every pro has its con. Montrose wasn't super scary, crime-ridden, or anything. Or at least I never felt unsafe there. But it was a little rough around the edges. Drugs were easy to come by, which meant a high concentration of drug users, obviously, and the behaviors that often come with it. Car break-ins were relatively common. My window got smashed twice in 4 years, which seemed about the average. There is a decent-sized homeless population to be berated by. And don't get me wrong, many of them were perfectly polite and harmless, but there were a good handful that were bold, shameless, and persistent. While muggings weren't the norm, and to my knowledge, none of my friends were ever mugged, it was definitely important to be aware of your surroundings if you were out and about, especially if you were alone or it was after dark. So one morning, about 8 a.m., I'm heading to work. I stop off at the drugstore on the corner next to my apartment to grab a juice and some cigarettes before I hit the bulk of my commute. There's typically at least one homeless guy hanging out in this particular pharmacy's lot at any given time, but it's not worrying. They're usually passed out and they're no trouble, just resting in the shade from the structure away from the hot sun. As I'm walking in, I see a grizzled, white homeless dude wandering around the far end of the parking lot, quite a ways from me. It seems strange, as they don't tend to panhandle here and it's too boiling hot to be comfortable wandering around on the asphalt in direct sunlight. And additionally, I didn't see any cars parked in his side of the lot, and no one's around for him to interact with, so his movements seemed aimless and random. He sort of glances my way, but it's hard to tell from that distance if he's looking at me or not. From where I'm standing, it looks like his eyes are just randomly darting around, fixating on one point of the parking lot, and then he quickly strides to that empty spot, and then he finds another spot a few feet away to look at and then skitter to. I don't feel threatened, but I'm definitely aware of his presence and questioning his stability. I make it into Walgreens undeterred, get my stuff, and I wait in line to pay. I'm inside 2 or maybe 3 minutes tops. I step out of the exit and I glance towards my car. I feel relieved when I don't see Mr. Crazy on my end of the lot, so I start walking to my parking spot. I've made it maybe 5 to 10 feet from the store's exit. The car's another 20 feet or so away, when he appears seemingly out of nowhere and steps directly in front of me, blocking my path. He asks me if I have any money that I could give him. He's older and pretty worse for wear. I feel bad for him, but I'm creeped out and in a hurry to get to work. I tell him what I often say to panhandlers, and it's usually true. Sorry, I don't carry cash. I step around him and keep walking, quickening my pace. I hear his footsteps follow me, just as quickly. From behind me he demands, "I know you have change." At this point, I'm rushing to my car, a hair away from breaking into a sprint. "I'm sorry, I can't help you." I loudly respond without so much as glancing back towards Nutter Butter McGee, who was still on my butt. I hit the unlock button on my keys and I have my arm out, ready to reach for the door handle. My hand slides onto the handle. I yank my car door open and I jump into the driver's side of my sedan. Before I'm even seated correctly, I immediately grab out to slam and lock the door. But it's too late. The Psycho Sam is now facing me, standing in the space between the open car door and I, blocking it from closing with his entire body. My car was just your standard 4-door, so as you can imagine, I am now in awfully close quarters with the crazy. And to make it even worse, he leans down so that his face is just about level with mine. His hair and beard are unkempt. His eyes are wild. As if I needed further confirmation, I didn't. This is not a sane individual. "Give me all of your money." He didn't point any weapons, at least that I could see, or scream or raise his voice. He just sternly said the words in a very matter-of-fact tone, as if this were the obvious directive and my compliance were a given. I was terrified. I stared up at him for a second, not knowing what to do. In an instant, adrenaline slammed into me, and instead of immediately responding to his demand, I kept eye contact with him on my left side, while my right hand shoved the key into the ignition and turned. No," was all that I could squeak. Ladies and gentlemen, that was the day that I ran over a hobo's foot, and I would do it again too if I had to. Some slight background. I'm a 27-year-old pre-op trans male, and I still appear very effeminate. I moved back home after I finished college in December of 2016, partially to save on my own bills, but also to help my mother, who had increasing physical, mental, and emotional challenges due to a physical disability. We discussed the situation for a few months and figured that, since it was so seriously mutually beneficial, that my moving back in was the most logical thing for me to do after finishing college. There was 1 week this past summer where there were a couple of homeless people who were hanging out in the front hallway of our apartment building. This hallway only goes to the apartment my mother and I live in, and there's a staircase right next to it to go to the apartment above mine, and there were only 2 apartments accessible from the front entrance. One night around 2:30 in the morning, they knocked on the door several times over the course of a minute or two. We, my very nocturnal mother and I, ignored them until they started banging on the door. I then walked up to the door and knocked back to mess with them. I worked night shift and was exhausted enough to be done with this BS. They then immediately knocked in after grabbing my softball bat and hiding it behind my leg. I opened the door to ask what they wanted, prepared to fight if I needed to. They said that they wanted a cigarette, and I told them that we didn't have any. I am a smoker, but I had smoked my last cigarette a few hours prior, and I hadn't gone out to get a fresh pack yet, and I shut the door. They knocked again, and I told them that if they didn't go away, I would call the cops. My mother got ready for bed not long after, and when I checked around 4 a.m., they were still there. My mother was still awake, so I let her know that I was going to call the police. I would love to say that that was the end, but they ended up coming back a night or two later, banging on our door again. I didn't even bother warning them. I just called the cops this time. Luckily, they left after the cops talked to them, and I haven't seen them since. Though when I went to leave the house the next morning, I found they had smeared poop all over the wall right outside of our apartment door. This occurred in October 2017. I'm currently a 14-year-old male, but at the time I was 13. I had just started the 8th grade. I lived in a mixed, suburban commercial neighborhood in New York City. I live with my mom. I have a dad and siblings and family on that side, but they're separate. Although that's another story for another day, and we've been to hell and back with the crazies. Panhandlers and stalkers to druggies and the drunks, you name it. However, this was disturbing. My mom's ex will always help us out with rides to and from school, which is like 2 neighborhoods over. We are very close with him, and thank God he was there for this. We live in a corner building only 4 floors tall, and he drops us off and waits for our confirmation text that we are inside and safe. Mind you, it's just after 3. Some background. My building is actually two joined together. The main entrance is to the courtyard, and then if you go to the left, you're at the door of the 39 building, and we are on the 45 side, which is to the right. My mom fumbles with the keys, and then I step inside while my mom is still on the doorstep with some bags. I'm about to go up the stairs. We live on the 3rd floor, and there are 4 units per floor. My mom asked me if I smelled anything, and I said no. She said that there is a very strong smell of beer. Within a few seconds, something starts pouring from above onto us. At this point, we both went into the doorstep. Since it was coming from far up, we originally thought that whoever was pouring the beer was on the roof. This wasn't outrageous because we have heard people on the roof before that were working. We look up and for a brief second, see a face in one of the windows in the stairwell. So I ran back to the car to get my mom's axe. I said that there was someone in the building or on the roof that was pouring beer down on us. I told him to please come with us to see what was going on, because we were starting to freak out knowing that someone was on our building property, which is private with bad intentions. We waited in the courtyard for anyone to come out of the building, including my 2-year-old, that was 1 at the time, Maltese puppy who was very protective of us in his bag. Sure enough, a dirty-looking man, late 20s, maybe early 30s, comes out of the building, and we smelled the beer so we knew that this was him. Also, we had never seen this man before, and since there are only 4 units per floor in the building, we knew who lived where, and this man definitely did not belong. And we then were absolutely sure that he didn't have good intentions, because Buddy, the puppy, starts growling, and then begins to scratch in the bag. We watched as he went to the entrance to the courtyard, and then turned right onto our block. We followed slowly behind and watched as he walked up for 2 blocks. Thinking that we were in the clear, we started to relax. However, he then turns around and at a very quick pace, begins to walk back down the street towards us. My mom's ex whips out his phone and begins to record this. He makes it back to us and stops a few feet from us and then points to the phone. He then gets very close to my mom's ex, who asks, "Can I help you?" He tries to look at the phone screen. I guess he knew that he was being videotaped. And then he tries to play the victim by asking why we were harassing him and following him. My mom's ex snaps back with, "Why are you in our building?" Mind you, he doesn't live with us, so this was very good of him. He then said that he comes into our building often, red flag number 1. That he sees my mom walking the dog late at night, red flag number 2. And that he's going to come back and scare us, red flag number 3. What the heck does that mean? Has he been stalking us and watching us when we didn't know it? When he was dumping the beer on us, this was on the landing between the 2nd and 3rd floors, which is right near our door. So hopefully, this is a coincidence. We are really freaking out now, but the guy casually walks away. My mom's ex tells us to stay safe and get inside, and then to text us when we are in the apartment. And then my mom's ex gets back in his car and follows the man 2 blocks down when he gets onto the bus. And then once he gets off the bus, he follows the guy for a few blocks until he goes into his house. My mom's ex sent us the guy's address in case we needed to make a report to the police for trespassing. My mom's ex is a retired cop, so he's quite knowledgeable with this kind of thing. This made sense to me, so I wrote down the address. I will obviously not give it out here for privacy reasons, not for him, but to me, because he lives not too far from where we are. For the next month, we always looked up and down the stairwell before leaving the building. We were nervous to come back late at night because we didn't know if this man was really going to stick to his promise and come back and scare us when we were alone with only an 8-pound puppy to defend us. It's now June 15th, 2018, and thank God nothing ever came of this. When Pokemon Go first came out, I couldn't keep up with my then girlfriend, now wife at all. I would spend hours walking around town and somehow she would always manage to outlevel me. So the only way I figured I would get ahead would be to sacrifice my precious sleep and traverse the rough and tumble streets of downtown SLC until the wee hours of the morning. And with that, my journey to become a true Pokemon master began. Suck it, Ash and Red. I started staying out until 1 and 2 in the morning 5 nights a week since my work didn't start until around 10 or so, and I felt like I had enough time to recoup. And it worked great. Not only did I get ahead of her, but developed a massive lead, made some friends, and even dropped about 12 pounds as well. It was working great. Mostly. For anyone who doesn't know SLC, it is a pretty big problem with homeless people. A good number of them strung out on drugs or violently mentally ill. This isn't stereotyping, it's just a pretty well documented fact, both statistically and from my own experience. It's gotten somewhat better since the state stepped in to clean up downtown, but at the time, they were filtering up into the nicer areas of the city at night, and setting up camp or accosting people playing alone. As a result, I bought several knives which I would carry on me. One in my bag, one where most people hold a wallet, one in my pocket, and another on a belt loop. Yeah, it may have been overkill, but I wanted to be prepared for any situation. After all, I didn't need to win a fight. I just needed to make sure going after me was not worth their time. And after getting sized up by a rather surly-looking group when I had simply stopped in to use a public bathroom by the state capitol, I decided it would be better to stock up than to be undergeared. Thankfully, I've never had to use it, but I have had to brandish it on more than one occasion. This is the creepiest time. One night, I'm walking back down the hill leading up to the Capitol when I see a guy on the same sidewalk a ways off, heading the opposite direction. At first glance, he seems harmless, but then I see him start twitching his shoulder uncontrollably, and realize he's probably tweaked out right now. As he gets closer, I can hear him talking to himself. Nothing intelligible, but I think I at least heard him say something about kangaroos are controlled by Interpol. At least I think that's what he said. Just weird. Anyways, I had been so focused on listening to him that I hadn't noticed that he had realized I was there. He began to walk towards me with that sort of purposeful stride you have when honing in on someone. He was still probably a half a block away and I needed to cross anyway, so I figured then was as good as a time as any to part company. As soon as I had stepped 2 feet into the road, he follows suit and he picks up the pace, making a beeline right for me. I unfasten the knife from my belt loop and palm it just in case. He still shambles towards me and I realize that I've got one last chance to get out of this without conflict. When he's no more than 10 feet away, I flick out the knife blade, casually brandishing it at my side, and there is just enough light on me to make out that I'm armed. The guy stops in his tracks and just walks back to the side of the road as I continued my walk to the throng of people gathered at a small park, with 4 stops all lured up and hoping for a Dragonite spawn. Sadly, that sort of dedication following such a creepy encounter didn't endear me to the gods of PG, enough to grant me one that entire summer. I freely admit that I could have been completely wrong about his intentions, but I wasn't willing to take that risk. Thankfully, I've never had another run-in like that again. Even on these subsequent nights I went out for binge playing, until the deep freeze of winter arrived. I've had some really weird encounters with homeless people here, including an overly aggressive panhandler who tried to come inside my apartment, and someone who thought walking in front of my car at a green light to keep me from going, so that he could beg for a ride to court. I'm absolutely not joking about this one. But nothing where I actually felt my life was potentially in danger like that night. In fact, my bad crap insane stalker act scared me more than the homeless do. However, that's an entirely different story for another day.